Hello everyone and welcome to another Guild Wars 2 video. Today we're going to be looking at the Living World update of Echoes of the Past, which is episode 6 in season 2. This episode begins with a letter from the Priory asking you to go with one of their explorers to check out the strange happenings around Fort Salma. Once you arrive there, you find several ghost seraph who believe that they're still defending the town from Mordremoth, and they attack you. Once you work your way through the town, you find the explorer you were sent to find, as well as the ghost of Belinda, who thinks that the explorer is a Mordrem and is trying to basically eliminate the Mordrem threat. Shortly after you get there, Marjorie and Casimir also arrive, and when Marjorie tells Belinda to stop, Belinda recognizes Marjorie. Marjorie's basically able to talk Belinda down, and Belinda notices that Marjorie has her sword, her katana. Belinda then tells Marjorie that she loves her and will be with her always and to show her the sword, where she then basically infuses her spirit into the old katana that she had. After that, this instance is basically done, and then you receive a letter from Marshal Traherne. Traherne's letting you know that the Pact has set up a new staging area in the Silverwastes, along with several of the other representatives from all the races, and that the Seraph have been able to secure a new route to the area through Fort Vandal, which the bandits which have been stationed there for a long time recently abandoned. Once you arrive in the Silverwastes, you go into an instance that basically is reintegrating you into the Pact, and Traherne basically bringing you up to speed on everything that's happening right now. He tells you that the Pact and all the cities have been taking this very seriously and have been sending troops to fight, and he also lets you know that everyone from Destiny's Edge, except for Ritlock Brimstone, who he can't get in contact with, are there to help fight against the Mordrem as well. He then goes on to say that basically the Pact is at the information gathering stage to try and figure out how best to attack Mordremoth before they go into a full-out assault on him. The idea that Traherne has is that every dragon, when they first wake up, if you notice, doesn't wake up very quietly. They have to have a grand entrance onto Tyria to make sure everyone knows that they're back up and awake. Usually this is done when they first wake up by sending out all their minions. The only real exception to that has been Kralkatorrik, who flew himself down to confront Glint right off the bat. But especially Zaitan and Primordius started by sending out their minions everywhere and wreaking havoc all over the place, and that's the stage which Mordremoth is at now. So Traherne's main goal for starting the war against Mordremoth is to find either how these minions are made or where they're made, and either slow it down or completely cut off the minions from being made anymore. The idea is to be able to try and contain this threat before it can spread to be too large, and then take on the dragon before it gets a giant army defending it. To start helping on this plan, he asks you to go and find a missing scouting team that's been sent out that had mostly Pact members but two non-Pact members, Kaith and Kanak. You accept this mission and tell him that you'll lead a rescue party to go find the scouting team and try and bring them back along with any information that they've uncovered. After that, you go to check in on Bram and Timey. Bram you talk to for a while and he asks you what you're basically going to do and says that he wishes he could come along and help, but he needs to stay around Timey because he's still kind of worried about her, especially since how close she came to getting killed or captured during the Inquest attack. You find talking with the Zephyrite Masters of Sun, Wind, and Lightning, basically the leadership of the Zephyrites now that the Master of Peace is no longer with them right now. Timey is trying to basically badger all of them to try and figure out things about, for instance, she starts talking about, was Aaron working with Scarlet? Then what were you doing out here? Why did you even come out here? And then why did he attack you? Just basically pushing them and pushing them and pushing them, which they're trying to evade and get away from. The Master's basic answers to any questions they're getting asked is so we can find somewhere safe, safe to land, or somewhere safe to be, and they won't say any more than that on that. The Masters quickly thank you and give you a chance to try and catch up on who the Zephyrites are and what they were trying to protect, like the whole legacy of Glint and all of that. And then they go on out to try and find the Master of Peace and help him. After that, the instance is complete, and you move on to go find Kay's scout squad. Once you arrive where Kay's squad is supposed to be, you very quickly find Kanak, who's been rigging the Mordrem bodies with explosives to basically try and do some guerrilla warfare against the Mordrem and kill them off. You continue through the canyon, rigging bodies and killing any Mordrem who get in your way, until eventually you find Kay's squad fighting a giant group of Mordrem. Upon seeing this, you immediately jump onto your white stallion and ride in and save the day. After the squad's safe, you talk with Kaith for a little bit, who basically says they haven't found anything yet, but with the number of Mordrem which you're defending, they must be getting close to something. Kaith and Kanak then throw barbs at each other, because get it, they're plants, and then you continue on with your mission. You fight through the last Mordrem in the canyon, including slaughtering a bunch of immature Mordrem wolves, which, tangent really quick here, is really interesting that the Mordrem wolves are actually immature, because that would imply that these are actually being grown instead of just corrupting wolves. Because if they just corrupted wolves, unless it was like a corrupted wolf pup, it wouldn't make sense. The term immature seems to be like they're actually growing the Mordrem. Tangent aside, you arrive at a cliff edge at the end of the instance, which leads you to a cutscene showing you it's kind of like a giant purple flower. The area which the flower is in is completely walled off by vines, so you cannot get close to it, but you are close enough to see it and know that it's something important. The Mordrem, however, have not been idle while you've been fighting your way through this canyon and are now grouping up to try and destroy you and the squad. You send up a flare and fight off waves and waves of Mordrem until finally a Pact helicopter arrives and saves you and the reconnaissance squad. After you arrive back in Camp Resolve, you receive a letter from Marjorie asking for you to come and help them at the Derman Priory. They're trying to get in to talk to the resident dragon expert, which the Priory has, but he's inside of a secure location which requires a cipher to access inside of the Priory. Amazingly and stupidly, the Priory sent the one person that knows the current cipher, besides the expert who's locked inside, out into the Silverwastes, where it's very dangerous right now and where she could very easily be killed. You report in very quickly to Tactician Involt, who tells you that Kaith is going to report to Traherne and tell him of all of your findings, and you ask him to forward on to them that you will have to be going for personal leave for a little bit to do something important. You very quickly go out into the Silverwastes to find Explorer Campbell Soup, who you convince to give you the cipher through a little bit of dialogue, and then you go on to the Derman Priory. You arrive at the Priory just as a Magister is finishing her lecture to a class about the Elder Dragons and basically saying the names of all of them except for one, which they believe is hidden deep in the oceans, but whose entry in the Scroll of the Five True Gods is partially missing. Now, this scroll is a scroll that dates back when the gods were on Tyria and it has the notes about what the dragons are and what they control and really what their whole purpose is on the world, or what we know of at least. This scroll is going to be important going forward, especially as more and more of it is getting translated. You then talk to Marjorie very quickly, telling her that you got the cipher, and then you find out from them that you're going to meet Magister Stonehealer, which is Ogden Stonehealer. Ogden Stonehealer, just so you know, is the last dwarf that we know of who is not part of the hive mind, I guess you could call it, that the dwarves became to fight Primordus. You talk to the Magister, who then leads you on a path to go into the inner sanctum of the Derman Priory, which involves throwing flue dust into a giant cooking oven and walking through it, because of course it does. This teleports you down into the inner sanctum of the Priory with a giant statue of Abaddon standing there waiting to greet you. So the basic idea of the cipher, which I didn't go over very well earlier, is that you have 3 phrases which were given to you. Each of these phrases are only part of the password. There are 2 more phrases you don't know yet, but each sentence of the cipher is pointing to a book which is inside the Derman Priory, which, when you read those books, points you to other books which will tell you the last 2 pieces of the cipher. So once you arrive, you go and talk to one of the main archivists, who tells you where those books are held, and also talks to you about the giant bone which is hanging from the middle of the Priory's library. This bone, just to put everyone's doubts at rest, is the tailbone of Zaitan, who is dead, and who is not just alive on the ground somewhere in Ara, so you're not going to get the raid later to go kill him. He is dead. So after you get the archivist's instructions and where the books are, you go read those and find the last couple books. By the way, there are a ton of books in here. I spent 45 minutes just reading all the books to myself while I came back later. And I recommend either looking up on the wiki or looking up other YouTube videos which have gone through and explained each of these books as they go. I will be talking about a few of these books in the theory section, because some of them are really important, but some of them are just cool throwbacks to Guild Wars 1 and cool little insights into things that really aren't important anymore, but it's just nice additions to the lore. So once you found the books that you were looking for and find the passwords, you were able to open the inner sanctum of the Priory. Inside of here you find the man, or should I say the dwarf, who you've been looking to meet, which is Ogden Stonehealer. You then speak to Ogden and ask him for information of how to deal with Mordremoth. He immediately counters with, actually, I think you need information about the meaning of your vision from the Pale Tree, which you have not told him or really anyone from the Priory. And he says that he knows that because there are those who have taken an interest, and I had some warning that you might be calling, blah, 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 blah. He tells you not to ask who it is who told him that it all come up in good time, and that to find what you should look for, you should go and inspect the hourglass which is in the room. This hourglass shatters when you touch it, and you go inside of one of the grains of sand and arrive in Glint's lair. Now, just so you know, this is the thing from Guild Wars 1 and also from the novels. Specifically, it's from the novels that brought up the fact that it could be any grain of sand, but Glint's lair, the way it was hidden in the Crystal Desert, is that it was hidden inside of a grain of sand by magic. So what you have done is gone through a grain of sand from the Crystal Desert into Glint's lair now, which obviously is uninhabited by Glint because she's dead. As you go through the lair, you find several of these facets of strength, darkness, light, basically just tests set forth to test your strength and your will and whatnot. After each of these fights, you're able to find a glowing crystal, which gives you a vision of the past. These visions center on the Master of Peace as he's searching around and trying to find something within Glint's lair. After defeating the very last malevolent memory which you find inside the lair, you get one last vision of the past with the Master of Peace standing and an egg being lowered into his hands. A mysterious voice, which is even what it's called inside of the chat log if you look, says that you must promise to protect it with your life. Will you? After the vision's done, a teleportation crystal appears, which teleports you back into the inner sanctum of the Derman Priory, to be greeted by Ogden Stonehealer, laughing at you and telling you basically that you should see the looks on your own faces. He then asks you, what do you know now that you didn't know before, which is of course the fact that Glint had an egg, which we've been guessing at for a while, and the Master of Peace has that egg with him. Ogden tells you that you received these visions for a reason, and that you must go find the Master of Peace because you were chosen. Find him and make sure that he arrives safely at where he's going. Where he's going, he can't tell you, because only the Master of Peace knows that, but go and find him and be smart. And with that, the Echoes of the Past episode of The Living Story is complete. So now let's move on to the theory section. I'll try and go through go through the theories that come up as you go through instance by instance, but a couple of the instances don't really have that much theory-wise, so they might get skipped. So in the first instance, which is the Seraph Ghost, there's not really too much theory to throw in here. I'll come back to this when I'm talking about my feelings on the patch, but yeah, there's not really too much theory. It's possible, as we've seen in many other places in Tyria, for ghosts to come up, usually when it's a big battle or something very tragic happens very suddenly, which Fort Salma fits that very appropriately, although it's kind of strange that it's all Seraph ghosts and there's no civilian ghosts, because obviously civilians would have been killed in the attack. When you first meet the Pact, there's no real theories that come up there, except for you could guess that the Master of Peace is trying to find somewhere for Glint's egg from past stuff, but that comes up more in Glint's lair. So as I mentioned before, in Case Reconnaissance Squad, in that mission, the very interesting thing is, if you look in there, you have the immature Mordrem wolves. Now, this kind of gives me, this thought just occurred to me of how the way the Mordrem are made. When you look back over this season, it's like when you first see Mordremoth's minions, they're not Mordrem, are they? So I just went back and double checked, but the first time that you see something that would be a Mordremoth minion, probably, is during the Cornered mission, where you're trying to follow Aaron and follow him to the Master of Peace. In this mission, you see jungle tendrils like we've seen before, but at one point you fight an overgrown husk and an overgrown wolf. Now both of these minions, especially the wolf, are very different from the Mordrem wolves that you see nowadays. The Mordrem wolves basically look like a flower with vines going all over it, that it's sort of in the shape of a wolf. The overgrown wolf looks like a wolf that's green, basically. So by this logic, it could be kind of assumed, plus the thing where you see the immature Mordrem wolves, where they're obviously growing, because they're not just something that's got corrupted, they're something that's being grown. It can be assumed that Mordremoth is able to, after it's taken over something, like the overgrown wolves, for instance, after it was able to take over those wolves, it was able to get the shape in its mind and make his own Mordremoth minions in the shape of that, in plants. I would not be surprised if in the future updates we see more Terragriffs, for instance, progressing from being more flesh-based and going on to being more plant-based. So if Mordremoth is able to, once it's corrupted something, being able to make something just like it as its minions, let's think back now on what all has Mordremoth corrupted so far. So we have the wolves and the husks, if the husks weren't already minions to begin with. We have the Terragriffs, which are new. We have the plant-based ones, such as the vines and the thrashers and the ley leechers and whatnot. We have the Mordrem menders, which appear to be Skrit, and we have Mordrem trolls, which are trolls. So all of these things, I'm guessing, have been corrupted by Mordremoth and are starting to now be made into Mordrem form. There's one thing that's very evident here that's missing, though. We know of at least 2 Sylvari that have been corrupted by Mordremoth, but yet we don't see any Mordrem Sylvari yet. Is it possible now that Mordremoth's able to make Sylvari, if he wasn't already able to do it before, with whatever his champions or however he was doing this? One other thing that's cool about this whole process is if you look at the way that the Sylvari are made from the Pale Tree, the whole theory behind that is that the Pale Tree made it because of Ronin's remains. Ronin's remains were what it grew out of, and so it had the biological code in there, and it made the Sylvari in appearance of the humans. Now, this is something that's pretty much known by most players. The Silvari come from the Pale Tree, and the Pale Tree makes them. However, most people don't really think about the fact that the Pale Tree doesn't just make the human-like Silvari, she also makes the Fernhounds, which are like plant dogs. Now, this sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? The Mordrem are able to get a genetic code or somehow get the shape of something in its memory, and then it's able to make more of them. The Pale Tree, after having humans in its memory, and somehow getting the Fernhounds original thing into its memory, is able to make Silvari and Fernhounds. This is another connection that could show that there is a connection between the Pale Tree and the Jungle Dragon, even if it's a champion or somehow something that spawns its minions but got turned awry, which is an old theory. But there's nothing definitive here, of course. It's just a nice little connection that could turn into something more later. Also, something that didn't really happen in this instance, but which is noticeable when you go back to the area from the instance happened in. When you first get there, you know there is this plant that's somehow defended behind the vines, and it's just got a bunch of things blocking it. So that was recorded on Wednesday, the day after the patch came out. Now, if you look at the footage in the background now, this was recorded on Tuesday, so 6 days later. What you see is a giant vine, which has got the sort of brightness around it that signify that it's a Mordremoth vine that's active, and it is moving out away from where the Mordrem are protecting. This vine has been moving forward after a couple days. That's the only footage I have of its position as it goes, but it has not been a static thing. It's been slowly going out. This is, of course, something to watch for in the next update, because I'm sure that we're going to get a counterattack, or somehow we're going to have to respond to this, and that's going to open the way to what the Mordrem are protecting, that purple flower thing. So now on to the Priory instance, which is quite a doozy, actually, and I guess I'll start with just going over a couple of the key books. One book which is present here, but not actually having any text to it, because it's not fully translated, is the Tome of the Five True Gods, which is a old tome that the five gods of the humans left behind. It was brought up earlier, like in that instance, but it seems to be a thing that basically outlines what the Elder Dragons are, and really, hopefully, it has some type of weakness inside of it. That's what they're hoping from deciphering it. The Tome of the Five True Gods is going to keep coming up, I assume, as we keep going forward, because, I mean, a book about the Elder Dragons that's that detailed with their names, that's not something we've had before. That's something that's pretty huge. There are a few other books that are scattered about that have interesting things that mostly date back to things from Guild Wars 1 and just nice little tidbits of extra information that weren't there from before. And there are little bits inside of the books, like for instance one talking about how a theory that if one of the dragons were to be killed, then the world would tip out of balance and that everyone would fall off of it. But the main two books inside of this library that are important to talk about are the Treatise on the Shadow of the Dragon and the Nightmare Harbinger. The Treatise on the Shadow of the Dragon is not too big, but it just basically is talking about how it's the name that's been given to the Mordremoth champion that's been found in the dream and also now in the real world at the Pale Tree. Now, the biggest book in this whole library to me is the Nightmare Harbinger, honestly. So, for those of you who don't know, Malik is from the Silvari personal storyline. He is a Silvari who is not born of the Pale Tree, who looks like us and has the morals of most of the Silvari, although he doesn't like have Ventari's teachings ingrained in him. And he's not obviously corrupted either. And he appears in the personal story, comes and helps you for a little bit, and then leaves to go try and figure out, because he doesn't have memories from before either. He goes back west to try and figure out where he came from. So the Nightmare Harbinger is talking about this Silvari that we don't really know that much about. The big thing that's really concerning about this is if he came from a different tree, which is one of the theories about this, then how did he get all of his knowledge? Is there another dream that he gets it from, or does that tree also have a human grave there, that's why he looks like humans as well? Another interesting thing is that the Nightmare Court very, very desperately wants Malik. They want him because they see him as the Harbinger, which is the bringer of something. He's going to bring forth something. Now, what he's going to bring forth, we don't know. Is it going to be good or bad? That just means that something's happening. It's an omen of things to come. Malik is an interesting character, and he's come up a lot in a lot of the Silvari lore discussions before, and I honestly expect to see him in this Living Stories season going forward. Glint's lair itself, beyond the fact that it's very cool that you're able to go back there and that all of this stuff is still there, doesn't bring up too much lore-wise besides the fact that the Master of Peace does have an egg of Glint, which is something that we've been guessing at for a long time. Now, the fact is, why is Glint's egg so important, you might be wondering. So Glint Glint became who she was because she was able to see into the minds of other people, of humans specifically, is when she became what she was. She was originally a champion of Kralkatorrik, but the Forgotten were able to break that hold over her, and she was able to learn language from looking into creatures' minds and realize that they weren't enemies. Because of this ability in Guild Wars 1, she was actually able to come up with the prophecy, the Flameseeker prophecies, which is a big spanning thing from Guild Wars 1, and she is a big protagonist in that game, I would say. Glint is, however, dead at Kralkatorrik's own claws, I guess you could say. And so, why is this egg once again important? If whatever comes from this egg, which is probably going to be a dragonling, if this dragonling that comes from the egg is got even like a measure of Glint's powers, that's mind powers. It's something to read into minds, and it could be a champion for humanity and for the races of Tyria, just like how the Shadow of the Dragon and Tequatl and all of them are champions for the Elder Dragons. At the same time, going forward, we need something to defend our minds from Mordremoth. Mordremoth seems to be working in a way that it corrupts people originally through insanity. Like Scarlet and Aaron both went absolutely insane, and then they became vessels for Mordremoth to work through. So, us being in Mordremoth's presence, that's going to very obviously put our minds at risk, and although we haven't seen anything but Silvari who put themselves not under the protection of the Pale Tree being corrupted so far, and when you're actually in the physical presence of this dragon, that mind power might be a lot stronger, and it might even be able to override the protection that the Pale Tree is giving us. So we need something that will protect us, just like we needed the orb to fight Zaitan to keep all of the Pact members from rising from the dead. Glint's offspring could be that thing that protects us, and that's why if Mordremoth's able to take it in the vision that we got from the Pale Tree, vines would spread everywhere unchecked and the world would be consumed in it. After you get through Glint's lair and the mission is actually over, you can talk to Ogden again, and there's about 6 dialogue options, which several of them are very important. Now, the questions of can you share what you know about the Zephyrite and the what do you know about the fight against Kralkatorrik are all backstory. They're things that have come up through the living world and also through Edge of Destiny, I think was the book's name, that went over the fight between Kralkatorrik and Glint and the forming of Destiny's Edge. The I need to know more about Mordremoth option basically is talking about how Mordremoth is rooted directly into the ground and its powers seem to be from mind and jungle. And we don't really know how it's getting its minions, although it's probably from taking over their mind, like I was saying. And that you'll have to learn more on that as you go through the jungle. The I'd like to know more about the Elder Dragons is basically going back over backstory. We know of the Elder Dragons, about how they take magic from the world when they're awake, fall asleep, and the magic ekes back out, usually destroying most civilizations that are on the world when they do so. When you ask about how it ties in with the Eternal Alchemy, he basically just says you can't really understand it. We can only grasp portions of it and what's in front of us, which mists, the Elders, and the Tyria, the Elder Dragons in Tyria. Anything beyond that's hidden from us, and we need to worry about what's in front of us before we worry about the entirety of the universe, kind of thing. And another interesting thing which has to do with Silvari is the option of Silvari were invulnerable to corruption, but not with Mordremoth. Why? He basically responds with how the way that we perceive the dream and nightmare is very simple, and it's too black and too white, too unsophisticated to explain the changes happening to us. And also goes on to say that the Pale Tree is said to protect us from the corruption of the other dragons, and both of the people who were converted rejected her, right? And you're also plant-based, so it makes sense that Mordremoth would be able to take control of you very soon. And then he tells you that you should go ahead and ask the Pale Tree yourself these questions, which we can't do right now. I went and checked. She's still unconscious. So that's something that we'll have to figure out as we go forward as well. Really, all of these options are really interesting, and I'm going to try and tack all of them on with audio at the end of the video after a little joke thing like I usually do. Just they're there if you want to be able to hear him and hear what he actually has to say, because there are interesting things from each of the things he talks about, and it does give you a little bit more backstory if you've forgotten some of the things. And really, that's all the theory I have to go over. I mean, we're going to very obviously be going further into the Silverwastes, and we're going to probably run into the Sinister Triad again, as they've not died, they have managed to retreat somewhere further west. So now on to how I felt about this patch. This patch made me very happy overall. I was really happy with this. It gave a lot of lore. It gave a lot of dialogue without making it... Most of it's optional is a cool thing. All of those books, you can just run through and click through the options on 5 of them and get through that instance in 5-10 minutes, that first part. We were in that first part of that instance for 45 minutes, going over everything that we found in there that was really cool. And I like the way that they did that. It's a nice balance. It gives people, if they want to look at it all, they can. If they don't, they can just walk right past it, and that's a really cool way of doing it. The Seraph instance, honestly, Belinda still bothers me. Belinda as a character was very obviously written to just be there to be killed off and to develop Marjorie. And in that Seraph instance, which is the shortest instance in this patch, we go back where all the Seraph are turned into ghosts, and she invests herself, her spirit, into the sword that Marjorie holds, and now Marjorie uses as a weapon. I don't really see the point of this, besides when we start fighting, the Mordremoth, and it seems kind of slapped on there, and I don't really know why. It kind of just makes me angry, though, because Belinda was a kind of cool character, although we didn't have much development to her, and she was only there to be killed and then be put into a sword, and she doesn't speak again. At least she's not a weird talking spirit sword, though, at this point. That would be kind of strange, too. So that instance bothers me, but that was the thing that I did not like the most about this patch. The instance where you meet back with the Pact is they handled that instance very well as well. So this is another instance where you could just go and talk to Traherne and talk to Bram and talk to Timey, and you're done. Scattered through that camp are all the members of Destiny's Edge, minus Ritlock, and representatives from all of the races that you can go and talk to, and they each have little bits of dialogue you can talk to them about. And also, while you're walking through the camp, you get thanked or saluted or like, oh, do you see him? He's the guy who killed Zhaitan. He's the commander. It's so awesome. By members of all of the races, because you're kind of a celebrity at this point, especially going forward to fight another dragon. You're one of the ones who killed Zhaitan. So it's really nice to feel like you're kind of being respected when you walk through the camp as the big war hero who's come here to save us. And it was done really well. It was done subtly. It wasn't like a giant parade when you walked in. But it was just, it was nice. It was a nice feeling going in that instance. Case instance, although it was kind of weird, like putting bombs in the Mordremoth bodies and all the guerrilla warfare you have there. It was a nice little combat instance that gives you a way to look forward. And it was also nice it was honestly, for me, because I like Kaith the most, it was nice to see Kaith again. And see her interacting with Canuck, her little brother. I already went over how I felt like how the books and the lore in the library is presented, but I really like... It's very obvious the Priory needed a location like this. They needed to place a giant library for all of their stuff. And just the way it was made and the way that the whole place looks, it's very cool and very... I like it a lot. I really enjoyed that, just walking around and exploring in there. Glint's Lair, although I didn't play Guild Wars 1, just walking through that thing, when you realize what it is, it's like it hits you, and it's just awesome. And just, I can imagine for those of you who played Guild Wars 1, the nostalgia that hits you, and I've been told that even the music there is just a remastered version of the music that played when you went into Glint's Lair. It's just, that was done really well, and it felt awesome, and I hadn't even been there before. I just read about it. Overall, I think this was a really, really good patch. It got a lot of people I know who don't really care about the story. They got them kind of interested in this, and it did it without shoving all the story down their throats. They had to actually look around a little bit and find stuff. The whole situation with the Mordremoth, it seems kind of realistic, I should say, for how realistic a fantasy world can be where you're fighting dragons. The whole army you're setting up your initial base like you were when we made Fort Trinity, and you're trying to get intel now. You're trying to figure out how are we going to deal with the Mordremoth. That's what this mission's about. How do we deal with Mordremoth and his minions, and how are we going to attack him? And it felt like you actually were contributing to that and pushing that forward, and that's why I really like this patch. I really can't wait for the next one, and honestly, this last half of this living story sounds like it's going to be really cool. It feels like that zone just feels a lot more like we're actually taking the fight to Mordremoth. It felt kind of like how Straits of Devastation should have felt. Straits of Devastation was kind of like this, but this map handles it much better, even though at this point we're kind of blockaded because we can't go past a certain point once the forts are captured. But anyways, that's all I had to talk about on the Echoes of the Past Living Story update. If I missaid anything or just forgot to say something that came up in this patch, or you just have another theory you'd like to bring up and discuss with me, make sure you post it in the comments section down below. I do read every single one of the comments that comes in, and I enjoy talking theory in the comments section down below. It's just a lot of fun to do that. I also just wanted to say that the thank yous that I've gotten for the videos I've made so far and helped catch people back up on the living story are really appreciated. That's why I do these things. I kind of do them for fun and also to try and help make sure that everyone knows what's going on in the living world now. And speaking on that goal of mine, if you've missed any of the past Living Story updates or you just want to kind of refresh yourself on what happened at one point, I have a video on my channel for every single one of the Living World updates, and I'll continue to do them for every single one going forward in the foreseeable future, at least. Do remember, if you wanted to hear all of Ogden's dialogue, I'm going to tack that on at the end of this video just so you can listen to him talk. And thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time.
For the millionth time, there are no culinary applications for bloodstone dust. None. No good can come from feeding it to living beings.
What do you know? I'll take the dust to the streets and start my own food cart. I'll be rich.
That old beast is going to give us quite a fight. Its natures are plant and mind, as you've undoubtedly inferred. In my opinion, it is the most destructive of the Elder Dragons, tearing the ground from beneath our feet. Creatures that live underground are especially vulnerable as its vines spread. It is my belief that it is rooted deep in the land, which may be an exploitable weakness. I do not know specifically how to overcome it, and I am still researching how its corruption spreads. With Zhaitan, any who died in proximity to its corruption became risen. To date, I've seen no evidence that the same is true of those who die in proximity of Mordremoth. You will undoubtedly learn more if you plan to enter the jungle. You already know much about them, but for Miss Delacroix's benefit, the Elder Dragons may be as old as the world itself. They're more than creatures. They're part of nature's workings. They rise and fall on a cycle that spans millennia. Much of what we know about them comes from a document written by the first humans to walk the face of Tyria, the Scroll of the Five True Gods. It is written in an ancient dialect. Therefore, it is subject to interpretation. In it, the gods revealed the names of the Elder Dragons: Mordremoth, Kraukatoric, Jormag, Zhaitan, and Primordus. There is one other name listed, but it is illegible, lost to time. I suspect this is the Deep Sea Dragon. The gods expound on how Tyria's health is tied directly to them. This portion is somewhat abstract, however. There are varied theories on what it means, but I believe it refers to the natural balance of magic. Too much magic, and the world spins out of control. Too little, and it crumbles into darkness. The last time the Elder Dragons awoke, they wiped out almost every intelligent race on the planet. It is from this low magic environment that the gods built the world as they wanted it. They were the ones who brought humans to Tyria. The gods shared the magic stored in the Bloodstone. That is a complex tale for another time. Slowly, more magic seeped back into the world from the dragons over thousands of years. Cultures evolved again. Ah yes, only Asura would attempt to quantify nature itself. But then, they are limited in perspective. By attempting to define the undefinable, they actually move further from the truth rather than closer to it. The eternal alchemy, nature, our world, the all, however you want to name it, is beyond understanding. We can only grasp portions of it. Even the Elder Dragons are small relative to the all. We see only certain layers of the mists, the Elders, and Tyria. Anything beyond that is hidden from us. We must content ourselves with first understanding what's before us. Right now, the Elder Dragons are the most critical to understand. The Zephyrites, yes. They inherited a thankless and difficult job from the Brotherhood of the Dwarves.
They didn't understand what they were taking on. but I believe they do now.
I was in the Brotherhood of the Dwarves. I am now its sole surviving member. We were the keepers of Glint's legacy. Glint had the power to communicate with her mind. She learned language from humans this way. According to her, other dragons speak and think in something I hesitate to call a language. But not Glint. She learned that humans and other races were not her enemies, but allies to be nurtured. Thus, she became a protector of the Tyrian races. We recognized the importance of this, as did some exceptional humans. Glint foretold the future in the Flameseeker prophecies over 1,000 years ago. The Brotherhood believed that she would one day become an elder dragon. She was old and wise, well on her way. You can imagine how it might have changed the world if she had survived long enough to become that powerful.
That's really interesting, actually.
You refer to Scarlet and Aaron. Similar symptoms, yes. I'm no expert on your kind, but your people's concept of nightmare and dream is simple. Too black and white, too unsophisticated to explain the changes affecting some of you. The Pale Tree is said to protect you from the corruption of the other dragons. They both rejected her, no? It makes sense that Sylvari would be vulnerable to Mordremoth, a plant-based being like yourselves. This is a question you should ask your Pale Tree. Only what Air told me. They nearly took it down, and Glint was killed during the fight. Destiny's Edge went to the Crystal Desert looking for Glint. Intending to destroy her, she instead managed to convince them to ally with her against her master, the Elder Dragon Kralkatorrik. They fought with all they had, but one of them was called away, and so their strength was diminished. Glint wasn't the only loss that day. A brilliant Asura named Snaff also sacrificed himself. That was years ago. Since then, Kralkatorrik surely has gotten stronger. Time is your enemy when dealing with the Elder Dragons.